Delar's breath was hardly visible through the snow, a faint mist, quickly lost in the winds as it passed his mask. It must have been hours since they left the lodge, though it felt like it had been longer. He clutched the ends of his coat, pulling them tighter into his chest, as he continued to trudge through a seemingly endless expanse of snow and ice. A freezing gale fogged his goggles. With a curse beneath his breath, he wiped it away with a swipe of his thumb. Damn the frost swarm. Adventurers rarely came out here, lest they wished to face an icy demise. It was a blistering freeze that struck down to the bone. And if the cold didn't kill you, the monsters certainly would. Towering yetis or ghoulish wolves, among others. Even among the hardiest adventurers, the Frostsworn was like a dirty phrase, a curse uttered with trembling lips. Delar knew the Republic wasn't audacious enough to deal with this place either. Thus, it was left to the Frost Elves. Not that travelers would often see them, the prideful hermits. Much of the land wasn't even explored yet, which only prompted stories and tales. Legend says travelers could hear the tearful sobs of those who perished within the Frostsworn meld with the everlasting winds, wailing into the ice for eternity. They sang a solemn scream, echoing their woes to an unforgiving land. That legend was just a story to scare the kids, something that sounded good in the lyrics of a folk song. Delar didn't have time for fairy tales. There was work that needed to be done. The storm continued to rage further ahead, with the land that followed looking like waves of snow and frost, an ocean of white. Pale hills and valleys spread as far as he could see, and far beyond that. It had been several miles since they passed the mountains, and no cave or sign of shelter was in sight. The cold didn't bother him much. He knew better than to brace the chills of the Frostsworn without proper equipment. His coat and pants were enchanted with a warming spell, like his boots, and he held a heat stone to his torso. A mask made of Yentin furs covered his long, shaved face. He tucked it higher over his nose, blinking away some of the snow. It was a shame they couldn't use magic to pass through here faster. They were rationing their stamina, just in case. We better be almost there, he thought. Wolves were howling in the distance. A few miles? No, they were closer than that. Delar's hands gravitated towards the hilt of his weapon, flexing his fingers in preparation. The noise persisted for a few more seconds, before being drowned out by the winds once again. It was likely a hunting party sending signals. He let out an anxious breath, relaxing himself. As he fixed the mask again, his eyes wandered to the man accompanying him. Unlike him, this man only wore decorated dark robes with elaborate trim covering his thinner form. The hood was pulled over his head, hiding his face. No warm clothes were underneath. Only magic kept the unrelenting cold at bay. Necromancers were a different breed, and Matthias was no exception. He'd proven himself a reliable companion by now. There were doubts when they first met. The stories must have been exaggerated, as most adventurers' tales were, Delar thought. This bookish man, with a penchant for uncanny fashion, who took joy in hearing his own voice, didn't impose much confidence. Thankfully, the man had proven him wrong. "You're certain she's here?" he shouted over the storm to Matthias. There was a nod. "Absolutely. You read the report, Delar, same as I. I can feel death nearby. It's potent, hanging in the air like a disease. It's everywhere. You know where we are. I need proof that this is her, and not some other body. We already passed God knows how many by now." All his ally responded with was a raise of his arm, pointing straight ahead. Delar traced Matthias's finger, staring into the pale abyss. Beyond the never-ending storm, just within sight, was a shape, not just one, but many. They became more discernible as they drew closer. What was once just shadows became wolves, their pelts white as the sleet around them. They appeared to almost waver in and out of existence as he stared, as if they were merely apparitions or figments of his imagination. Spirit wolves. This was made more evident by the luminous scarlet glow of their eyes. It seemed a whole pack of them, as there were adults and cubs. Most were seated, others pacing around something, circling it diligently. That something, too, became a recognizable figure. Lying prone on the ground was the body of a woman. Her skin was a vibrant red, and a horn protruded beyond her coal-colored locks. The snow around her body had melted, and her azure clothes appeared warm and dry. Even in death, a demonkin's body is hot enough to melt ice, he thought as he stepped closer. Her body was preserved, untouched by decay or animals. The beauty of her face was fresh, sculpted cheeks and full lips identical to the picture in her report when she was alive. Her head rested to the side as if sleeping, ready to rise after a long rest. If he didn't know better, Delar would swear she was unconscious. It had been years since she disappeared, though, based on the report. As Delar approached, the wolves snarled. They bore their teeth and lowered their bodies, ready to pounce. It looked like there were at least 10 of them. With their ability to slip into an incorporeal form, spirit wolves were difficult to combat. The pups backed away, whimpering as the adults became aggressive. He saw Matthias's cloak shift, his arms prepared to rise. It was likely to cast a spell. "Wait," Delar said, cutting both parties off. "Let me handle this." The man stopped, lowering his arms and turning to Delar. His thin face, barely visible behind the hood, expressed concern, but he nodded and stepped back. Delar held his hands out and began to speak. They were soft, comforting words that only he and the wolves could understand, woven with magic. Those words hung around the wolves, who perked up their ears and turned their heads. At first, they appeared confused, remaining stationary. He continued to speak, motioning to the woman. "We can protect her," he said. One by one, the animals started backing away, leaving room for them to approach the body. He nodded to the beasts. Kneeling before her, Delar inspected the woman's corpse. There were lacerations on her arms, a nasty gash across her neck with dried blood blotting it, and quick rips in her clothes as if slashed by a thin object. Killed by a Maquis, one of the few things that wouldn't listen to her. We'll have to deal with those marks later. "Start the ritual," he said as he stepped back. "The wolves will let us take her." His ally approached, circling the woman twice, crunching a path through the snow. He knelt before her body, placing a hand on her face and a thumb on her forehead. A misty black fog drew around his cloaked form, swaying and waving in an opaque, seemingly erratic mass. It never strayed more than a few inches from Matthias's body, the smoke flicking at the air aggressively. The only glimpses Delar got of them were through brief pockets in the haze that opened up occasionally. The smell that hung in the air was that of ash. The wolves kept their distance. The ritual would take some time, considering the nearly impossible feat Matthias was accomplishing. Delar needed to ensure nothing attacked either of them during this time. He cracked both knuckles and circled the area with his eyes. Nothing beyond the storm. There likely wouldn't be anything around. It had been relatively quiet during their trek, aside from the constant snow and winds. They were far from any caves, and the elves certainly wouldn't interfere, even with their disdain for necromancy. He glanced back at the wolves, who remained 10 feet away. It was surprising that the beast tamer made friends, even in death. They protected her body for at least a few years. How remarkable. The process took a few more minutes. Delar didn't say anything during that time. He simply kept watch. Nothing came. Once he heard a woman's voice over the fog, he knew the ritual was finished. As the smoke lifted, the woman, now propped up by Matthias, was hysterical. Her eyes darted frantically to every corner, settling on Delar a second later. "What's going on? I'm alive?" she asked, her voice coarse like sandpaper. He knelt before her, offering the woman a friendly look to welcome her back to life. "I'm afraid not, Veneris. You're still very much dead. We've brought you back with a form of necromancy, but only for as long as the spell holds." "For what purpose? I was in the end plane. I remember it vaguely." "Would you like to live again?" That caught her attention. "Perfect. I know how to make that happen. You'll have to help me, though. I need your skills, and your beasts. They certainly missed you." Delar motioned to the wolves surrounding them. Veneris eyed them for a minute, thoughts circling behind the ruby of her eyes. He gave her time to think. Delar could imagine the many frantic words that were spinning in her mind right now. Why was she here? Who were these strange men? What did they want? All questions he would answer in time. He just needed her to accept his proposal. "What do I need to do?" she finally asked after a minute. "You're going to help me find someone." If you enjoyed this reading, this was the first chapter of my upcoming book, The Lightning Blade. It is a fantasy inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, and it is a project I've been working on for many years now. There will be an ebook and an audiobook coming out next year on Amazon. I will not be the one narrating the audiobook, though. I simply wanted to give everyone a preview on what this chapter, and maybe a few more, are going to be like. If you enjoyed it, please stay tuned for more, and if you want updates, you can check out my Facebook page, SBC Author, for those. There will be more content about the book in the future if you're really itching for more. And if you enjoyed this and are really excited for this release, thank you. Any support I get is very much appreciated. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful day.